A fruit tree can take 5 years to reveal a mistake you made in 5 minutes. The leaves may look perfect, the trunk gets thicker, and every spring the branches cover themselves in flowers. You keep telling yourself that the real harvest is coming next season, but then August arrives, and the tree is still carrying more leaves than fruit. Now multiply that mistake across an entire backyard. 7 trees and shrubs, followed by years of watering, pruning, mulching, and waiting, can still leave you with only part of the harvest you thought you planted. That is how many backyard food forests fail. They do not collapse in one dramatic afternoon. They fail slowly enough that everything looks successful until too much time has already passed. Built correctly, those same 7 planting spaces can do something a lawn never will. Currants and gooseberries can begin filling bowls while the larger trees are still young. Cherries follow. Apples and pears build heavier crops as their branches mature, and hazels add food that can be dried and stored. The ground becomes cooler beneath the canopy. Fallen leaves begin feeding the soil, and one corner of the yard keeps producing without being torn down and restarted every spring. This is not the promise of one lucky harvest. It is the promise of walking into the same yard 10 or 20 summers from now and still finding food at several heights. But 3 mistakes can steal most of that harvest before it begins. The first mistake leaves healthy trees with empty branches. The second allows the upper trees to choke the crops beneath them. The third creates a garden that looks productive, but becomes miserable to prune, protect, and harvest. Avoid those 3 mistakes, and 7 well-chosen plants can become one of the hardest working parts of an ordinary backyard for the next 20 years. Most annual gardens return close to zero every winter. Tomatoes die, vines collapse, beds are cleared, and the next spring begins with another round of seeds, transplants, watering, weeding, and rebuilding. Annual vegetables are still worth growing. They produce quickly, fill seasonal gaps, and put fresh food on the table within weeks. The limitation is that they live on a short clock, so much of the work begins again every year. Fruit trees and berry shrubs work differently. The first season builds roots, the next adds branches and flowering wood, and those branches create more places to carry fruit. As the plant matures, the harvest can become larger without requiring the entire system to be planted again. That is why waiting matters. A tree planted this year begins the clock now. Delay it until next year, and every future harvest begins 1 year later. A 7-plant food forest uses those different clocks together. Apple, pear, and plum create the taller fruiting layer. A compact cherry and hazel fill the middle, while currants and gooseberries produce closer to the ground. The berry shrubs can give the gardener something to pick, while the larger trees are still mostly branches and promise. Those early handfuls matter because they stop the project from feeling like a decade-long waiting game. The berries usually begin first, the smaller fruit trees follow, and the larger trees become increasingly valuable as their roots and canopies mature. Eventually, harvest season no longer means one crop from one bed. There may be berries for fresh eating and freezing, cherries for jars, apples for storage, pears ripening during a short and heavy window, and hazelnuts waiting after the soft fruit is gone. That is the dream worth planting for. It is not a perfect diagram or a magical garden that requires no work. It is a living yard that produces more because it has survived another season. But a list of 7 plants is not automatically a working food forest. 1 apple, 1 pear, 1 plum, 1 cherry, 1 hazel, 1 currant, and 1 gooseberry may sound like 7 complete crops. In reality, it can be closer to 4 dependable crops and 3 unanswered questions. The most expensive orchard mistakes often grow beautifully. A tree can produce healthy leaves, gain several feet of height, and cover itself in spring flowers while still missing the relationship required to finish the fruit. Apple is the clearest example. A healthy apple may open thousands of blossoms and still set very little fruit when no compatible variety is flowering nearby. You can water it deeply, add compost, mulch the root zone, attract bees, and protect the bark from deer, but none of those actions can replace useful pollen that does not exist. A bee house cannot repair a missing cultivar. Many pairs create the same problem. Having another pair somewhere nearby is not automatically enough. The second tree has to be a useful match, and its flowers must open, while the first tree is still ready to receive pollen. Hazel is even more deceptive. One plant may carry long male catkins and tiny female flowers at the same time. Tap a mature catkin, and a visible cloud of pollen may drift into the air, making it appear impossible for that plant to be missing anything. But one hazel is often only half a nut crop. Many hazels cannot reliably use their own pollen, so they need a second compatible cultivar, releasing pollen, while the small female flowers are receptive. Two different nursery labels do not automatically create a working pair, because the timing still has to overlap. This is where gardeners lose years. They see flowers, wait for nuts, blame the weather, water harder, add fertilizer, and keep hoping the next season will be different. Meanwhile, the missing partner was never planted. Before counting any apple, pear, or hazel as part of the future harvest, name the plant that will complete its flowers. When that partner cannot be identified, the crop should not be counted yet. Orchard growers proved this nearly a century ago. In a 1929 Michigan experiment, some flowering branches were isolated, while others received compatible blossoms and insect access. After bloom, the difference remained visible on the branch. Isolated flowers left little fruit, while branches with useful pollen held more fruitlets. The lesson is simple. Flowers are not a harvest until the right pollen reaches them. Fortunately, solving that problem does not require turning 7 trees into 14. A multi-graft apple can carry 2 compatible cultivars on one trunk, and a pear can do the same. A confirmed self-fruitful plum can occupy one position without automatically requiring a second plum beside it. Currants, gooseberries, and many tart cherries can often produce with one cultivar, although the exact variety still needs to be checked before purchase. Hazel is the stubborn part of the plan. When a dependable nut crop matters, 2 compatible cultivars normally need to exist in the yard or close enough to exchange pollen. That gives the homeowner 2 practical choices. The first keeps the essential partners inside the property by using 1 multi-graft apple, 1 multi-graft pear, 1 self-fruitful plum, 2 compatible hazels, 1 currant, and 1 gooseberry. The tart cherry is removed, but the pollen plan becomes more dependable. The second choice keeps all 7 original crop types and borrows pollen from neighboring trees. The apple may connect to a confirmed crabapple or another apple nearby. The pear may rely on a compatible pear next door, while the hazel may receive pollen from another known hazel across the property line. Nearby trees help backyard crops every year, but a tree is not part of your plan simply because it can be seen over a fence. You need to know what it is, when it flowers, and whether it is a useful match. A storm can break that tree, a neighbor can remove it, or a new homeowner can replace it with lawn. Borrowed pollen can work, but it remains borrowed. Multi-graft trees also require one small correction that can protect years of harvest. One graft often grows harder than the others, and when it is left alone, the strongest branch may shade or weaken the cultivar supplying the pollen. Keep the grafts labeled, compare their growth each year, and prune the dominant branch before it takes over. This is not complicated maintenance. It is a few minutes of attention protecting a crop that may continue for decades. Young trees are misleading because they make almost any layout appear spacious. At the nursery, 7 of them can fit in the back of a pickup. Once they are placed in the yard, the gaps seem enormous, so another shrub gets pushed between them. Then one more plant fills the final open corner because unused ground feels wasted. For the first few seasons, everything fits. The real problem begins when the branches start touching. The word dwarf causes some of the worst mistakes because it sounds like a final measurement. It is not. Different dwarf and semi-dwarf rootstocks can produce very different trees. One apple may remain near 8 or 10 feet, while another may spread 12 or 15 feet. Some need permanent support. Pears can grow larger than expected, and hazels can become broad shrubs when left unmanaged. Do not space trees by how small they look on planting day. Space them for the shadow they will throw 10 summers from now. When the upper canopy closes over the lower shrubs, the food forest begins working against itself. Currents stretch toward weak light. Gooseberries become thinner and less productive. Wet foliage dries more slowly, and fruit colors poorly. Branches begin rubbing together, and every pruning job becomes harder. The canopy you waited years for can become the reason the lower layer fails. Before digging, find the expected mature width of the exact rootstock and cultivar. When an apple is expected to spread 10 feet, mark the trunk position and measure 5 feet outward in every direction. Lay a garden hose on the ground to show the future edge of the canopy. When the expected width is 12 feet, use a 6-foot radius. Repeat the same test for the pear, plum, cherry, and hazels. Anyone can make 7 saplings fit, but the hose shows whether 7 mature plants still belong there. Walk around those circles in the morning, around midday, and late in the afternoon. Watch the shade from the garage, fence, established trees, and neighboring buildings move across the future berry layer. A position that appears bright at noon may lose the most useful sunlight during the rest of the day. Where the site allows, place the tallest trees toward the north or back of the growing area. Do not allow the pear to become a roof over every berry shrub, and do not let a spreading hazel claim the only sunny path. The mature width matters more than the nursery photograph. The goal is not to squeeze the highest number of plants into the yard. The goal is to keep every layer producing after the trees finally become worth waiting for. A food forest is not finished when everything fits on paper, because someone still has to work inside it. Young trees need water during dry periods, fruit may need thinning, dead and crossing branches have to be removed, and birds may force you to use netting. Mulch has to come in, and full baskets have to come out. A crowded garden can produce fruit and still become a place nobody enjoys harvesting. Before planting, bring the real tools into the yard. Roll a wheelbarrow around the hose circles, open the pruning ladder beneath the future apple and pear, hold netting where the cherry canopy will eventually stand, and identify the path for irrigation. When a ladder leg lands in the gooseberry position, the plan is already wrong. When the wheelbarrow has to scrape through the hazel, the path is already disappearing. When netting cannot clear the fence, while the tree is still represented by a circle on the ground, it will not become easier after the branches are full of leaves and fruit. A harvest still needs a way out, which means open ground is not wasted space. It is where wet foliage dries, where a person stands to prune, and where a full basket passes without being caught by branches or gooseberry thorns. The best food forest is not the densest one, it is the one you still want to walk into 10 years later. Once the pollen partners, mature spacing, and harvest paths are correct, the planting itself becomes much simpler. Begin with the trees that will form the long-term structure. Apple, pear, and plum need the strongest positions because they will occupy those spaces the longest. Plant bare rootstock during the suitable dormant period for the region, before active growth begins. The trees may arrive looking like sticks with a handful of roots, but that is normal. Year 1 is not about filling a basket. It is about getting those roots through the first summer. Spread the roots instead of twisting them into a tight hole, and keep the graft union above the finished soil level. Water deeply after planting, then cover the root zone with mulch, while keeping the mulch away from the trunk. The next priority is protecting the bark. Rabbits, voles, and deer can destroy in one night what the tree spent an entire season growing. A trunk guard, stable support where the rootstock requires it, and consistent water during dry weather are not decorative extras. They are what gets the tree to year 2. Avoid forcing soft, fast growth with heavy feeding. The first job is establishment, not maximum height, so keep the soil covered, watch the moisture level, and allow the roots to claim the site. In year 2, begin shaping the tree you actually want to harvest from. Remove damaged, crossing, or badly placed branches, and keep enough openness for light and air. On multi-graft trees, stop one variety from swallowing the others. This is also when mistakes begin revealing themselves early enough to correct. A berry shrub may already be leaning toward stronger light. A branch may be closing a path. Or a wet spring may reveal repeated leaf spots or dieback. Correct those problems while the plants are still small enough to change. By year 3, parts of the planting should begin paying back. Currants and gooseberries may already be producing, while a cherry or dwarf fruit tree may offer its first modest crop. When a young branch sets more fruit than it can safely carry, thin the crop instead of sacrificing the structure for one exciting season. The first handful is not the final promise, but it proves that the sequence has begun: roots first, then structure, followed by increasingly serious harvests. A good layout removes preventable mistakes, but it does not control the weather. Late frost can erase a perfect bloom. Cold rain can slow the insects moving between apple and pear flowers. And birds can strip cherries just before harvest. Deer can remove young shoots, while rabbits or voles can damage bark near the ground. Poor drainage can kill a tree whose pollen and spacing were perfect. Stones in the bottom of a planting hole do not turn wet ground into good orchard soil. When water remains around the roots, solve the drainage or move the planting position before assuming mulch will rescue it. Climate also gets the final vote. Currants and gooseberries generally fit cooler conditions better than extreme heat. Some cultivars require more winter chill than a warm region can provide, while disease pressure and local restrictions may also change the plant list. That does not destroy the 7-tree idea. It means the plants must serve the yard, rather than forcing the yard to serve a fixed list. A hotter region may use different shrubs, a colder yard may need hardier cultivars, and a wet site may require a different location entirely. The species can change, while the larger promise remains the same: food at several heights, harvests arriving on different clocks, and a yard becoming more productive as the seasons accumulate. The return does not arrive as one giant harvest. It begins repeating in ordinary ways. The first currants may disappear before they reach the kitchen, while gooseberries become jars on a shelf. A young apple gives a few fruit, then enough to require thinning, and eventually enough that storage becomes part of the season. Pear branches that once held only flowers begin needing support, while hazels add a crop that can wait after the softer fruit is gone. Leaves fall beneath the trees and become part of the mulch. The ground stays cooler, roots occupy soil that once grew nothing but grass, and pollinators keep returning because something is flowering across more of the season. This does not remove every chore, and 7 plants do not replace every aisle in a supermarket. But one part of the yard stops returning to zero every winter. Each season begins with roots, trunks, branches, and soil that were already built during the years before it. That is why perennial food is worth the wait. The same ground becomes more useful because the plants have been alive longer. The gardener changes as well. You begin remembering which side of the apple blooms first, which berry needs more light, where the ladder fits, and which hazel releases pollen before the other. The yard is no longer just a plan. It becomes a place you understand by season and by habit. By then, the 7 plants no longer feel like 7 purchases. There is fruit to eat now, fruit to store, shade to stand under, and work that matters, because every season builds on the last. By harvest season, healthy leaves are no longer enough, because the branch either held fruit or it did not. Next spring, photograph the apple and pear blooms with dates, then watch whether their partners open at the same time. Check the hazels when the catkins begin releasing pollen, and look for the small female flowers on the second plant. Return after petal fall. Green fruitlets show where the chain continued, while empty stems show where frost, weather, damaged flowers, or a missing partner ended it. Then look lower. Check whether the berry shrubs are still receiving light, whether air can move through the branches, whether the ladder can open, and whether a wheelbarrow can reach the back without breaking shoots or catching thorns. These checks do not shrink the 20-year promise. They protect it. Do not call 7 young plants a food forest simply because they fit in the yard today. Name the pollen partner, plant for the tree's adult shadow, and leave enough room to carry the harvest home. Do that, and 20 years from now, the proof will not be a planting diagram or a row of faded nursery tags. It will be an August afternoon, with fruit hanging at every level, jars already filling inside the house, and branches finally paying back every season you refuse to waste.